Hello and welcome to Season 8, Episode 7 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, still reading George Lakoff's Moral Politics, How Liberals and Conservatives Think, as he lays out his idea of the different words that liberals and conservatives use that reinforce their own worldviews. We're finally kind of past the first section, and he's actually starting to talk about the model, but it really feels like, I don't know if you thought this in these couple of chapters, he's kind of repeating himself again.
Oh, you think?
Yeah.
He reminds me of when I had an assignment due in college, and I had a page minimum, and so I would stretch out my introduction to say something, and then the main body I would stretch that out saying the same thing, and then I would really expand the conclusion.
That's great. We're reading 2 chapters today.
I think the two of us had opposite attitudes towards higher education.
Why is that?
Graduate experience. I was trying to minimize my effort and reach the optimum amount of grade per unit of effort. That doesn't mean that you're going to get A's and everything, which I didn't. But I certainly maximized the grade per effort unit.
No, I understand.
I think you exceeded. I don't think you were concerned about the level of effort. You just wanted to get a great grade and know the subject.
Oh, that's true. I did graduate with a 4.0. That's 2 degrees. So there you go.
So we're going to talk about grade inflation now?
Well, we should mention...
We're in part 3. Should we mention that?
Is this part 3?
Yes, part 3. The beginning of part 3 is... I don't know what part 1 was.
I guess part 1 was the introduction.
I guess so. And this is from family-based morality to politics. So he's trying to use... we've already talked about his theory of family-based family-based morality, and now he's going to apply it to politics. Yes. What were you going to say?
I was going to say we should mention the cicadas. There's a lot of cicadas outside. I don't know if they're coming through on the recording, but it's the time of year when... Is it the 13 year and 17 years at the 2 time spans? But they're overlapping on this year.
They're overlapping this summer.
And so
I think it's... in some ways beautiful because they come in waves like the sound.
Yes,
it's like almost like the sea crashing upon the shore.
But you go outside and it's very loud,
yes.
like they are screaming, and it's just like a surrounding sound all around you. Is these horrible little bugs everywhere?
No, you think they're horrible?
They're pretty gross. Little red beady eyes that fly at you.
They're kind of pretty though.
No.
Yes.
They're like big cockroaches.
Big, beautiful cockroaches. I mean,
we should talk about
they
that.
They have colorful wings, kind of.
A little bit.
A little orange in them.
Yeah.
And they're really dumb.
Yeah.
Like they just fly into stuff. They have a short lifespan. I think I'm seeing a lot of them
3 to 4 weeks
dying, and they just bump into you, which is really disturbing because they have these big, floppy, like dinosaur wings. Like I would expect that they would have been around in the dinosaur period. I don't know if that's true, but they remind me of some prehistoric flying creatures.
That's great. Let's talk about the chapter.
So the listener may hear the crescendo of the singing cicadas. So they're not singing; it's really beating wings, I guess, isn't it?
I don't know.
It's not. They're not vocalizing.
No.
And I think you would get more from listening to cicadas than you would from reading Mr. Lakoff. I'm just joking. Ha ha. Again, I would so he's trying to make this logical leap or step from his theory that, and again, I think he's right in a sense that there's the reason why conservatives and liberals respond to different types of languages because they have different moral philosophies. I think different political outlooks. I think he's trying to. His theory is kind of almost a little simplistic, but I think that's what he thinks is the beauty of it. Is that it kind of depends on how you view family.
Yeah.
If you view family as the valuable family being like a strong father figure type, then you're going to have conservative values. Nurturing mother family values, you're going to be a liberal. And I think there's some. Yeah,
I think he's generally right in like the outcome of those things. Like conservatives tend to prefer strict father, but I think he's missing the step of the overall morality structure isn't just this family metaphor.
Yes.
Like, especially for conservatives, if you're a religious person, there's going to be so much more to your moral structure, to your, worldview than just this family metaphor. But he's just kind of looking at the family part of it and going from there to politics. And really you should be looking at something behind both the family part and the politics that is deeper than both of those things.
I read a funny joke that reminds me of, you're fearful of this. I can see it in your eyes.
I don't know what you're about to say.
No, this is, how does it go? The people that do not understand the difference between correlation and causation all die.
Is that a Norm Macdonald joke?
It sounds like one. That makes sense. But I think he's right on the correlation.
Yes.
And he's making the argument that it's causation. I
yes.
think, but he doesn't say it, does he?
Not
in so many words.
Yeah.
Right. He implies it. And so that's part of my frustration with him, because I think he tries to say too much, and he would say more if he said less.
Yeah, I agree.
If he just limited his analysis to the language that the different political parties with different moral values use, I think it would be much more useful to analyze, hey, how does this resonate with, if you say this particular type of political thought, like, the government isn't your daddy. How does that resonate differently with people that have liberal or conservative?
And I keep thinking we're getting to that part in the book, but he just keeps introducing more things.
Yes.
But I think eventually there is a whole section where it is just like specific political issues, like each chapter's political issue. I think that's where he finally gets into the meat of everything. So listeners can get excited.
I'm in an oven. It's getting very hot. All right, chapter 7 is the first chapter of part 3. And the title is Why We Need a New Understanding of American Politics. And he makes an argument. And the argument is...
essentially that neither side understands the other.
Yes. But I would say, should I talk about how he's so inaccurate about the conservatives, or is everybody getting bored from that?
We could talk about it a little bit.
Bit. So he says that, he starts off with a failure of liberals to comprehend conservatives, and he's right about this. But again, it's kind of a gorillas in the mist. Hey, look at these weird conservatives. We just don't understand them. And he says but he does acknowledge, I did appreciate this, because I think there's a lot of truth to this, that there are 3 analytical failures by liberals when evaluating conservative thought. Number 1, according to him, conservatism is the ethos of selfishness. 2, conservatives just believe in less government. 3, conservatism is no more than a conspiracy of the ultra-rich to protect the money and the power, to make themselves even richer and more powerful. And I think the funny thing is that this book is so out of date now, because the parties, the Trump effect, has really mixed up the party's views, especially with regard to the conservative views on less government intrusion, and about the super rich, because the super rich are almost uniformly now, not quite, but I'd say 80-20 left wing. I mean, not just Democrats. I mean, like left wing ideologues, almost like communist weirdos. At least the more prominent ones, and the ones that are politically active, I guess I'd say. Yeah. But he go ahead.
I was just going to keep moving along.
You're going to move me along?
I don't mean to. But I was just going to say that he moves from there, just kind of breaks down why each of these, ideas are wrong.
Yes.
And he, I guess, does a fine job. It's still a little bit insulting to conservatives, I think. But with the selfishness one, he was he essentially his argument is simple pragmatic appeals to self-interest should work on conservatives. They don't.
Yes.
Okay,
right.
Yeah, sure. But he says, conservatives in California would have endorsed the single-payer initiative since it would have saved them money. Just stating this as a fact, I don't even know what that is. That predates me.
It predates Obamacare. So he's writing this in the 1990s, and it was an interesting period of time, because you had, for instance, gay marriage was on the ballot in California for a constitutional amendment to allow gay marriage. And it was defeated, almost, it was 58% against it. But they also they wanted to push through single payer health care, and that was defeated. And so from a left wing perspective, it doesn't make any sense why you wouldn't want to have a single payer, which means government, taxpayer funded health care. But he just asserts that if you used a harsh cost benefit analysis, you'd be in favor of single payer. That denies the reality that there are at least differing opinions as to the cost effectiveness of having government funded healthcare. And so he's very simplistic in his examples that he uses of conservative thought, which is just so overwhelmingly frustrating to read because you just want to argue with him.
And I think, but at the same time, he's attacking like an overly simplistic view. So he's like at the same time like attacking the simplistic view that it's just the ethos of selfishness, but also attacking it by being overly simplistic with how he's attacking it.
Yes.
It's a very strange way to go about it, because what he should be saying is, well, it's not just selfishness. There's a variety of factors that go into decisions. You're not going to convince anyone to do anything just because you say, oh, well, this is cheaper. Yes. You're going to look at a variety of things and then analyze based on that. Of course, conservatives aren't just going for the cheapest option all the time.
Well, yeah, and a better example would be it'd be a lot cheaper just to execute people on the street for committing robbery, right? It would be cheaper. You wouldn't have to go to the expense of a trial and imprisonment or whatever. But conservatives don't agree with that. They do, and he gives a criminal prosecution, criminal procedure argument about cost-benefit analysis. And I think he even talks about the death penalty. Why they advocate for the death penalty? Well, but that's separate. But there's a reason why conservatives don't believe in a strict cost-benefit analysis, and he doesn't really give that. But yeah, it's kind of like it's weird to be agreeing with his conclusion, but then arguing with all the reasons why he got to his conclusion, because he's such of the left. He doesn't understand that the mainstream views on these conservative thoughts are not so simplistic, but he's insulting the morals of the people that disagree with him. But whatever. Okay, so he makes the point that, and it is a correct point and a valuable point, that liberals view conservative thought on this cost benefit analysis is just too simplistic. So he's right about that. He gives some good examples of that. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. But the next section I thought was great, talking about less government.
It doesn't make any sense now, right?
Because it's just completely different.
Yeah, but he was right at the time. It's kind of funny. Go ahead.
Because what he says is conservatives don't merely want less government. I don't know what he even means with this sentence. They want to raise spending for the military, even bring back Star Wars. I don't know what he's referencing there.
You don't know what Star Wars is.
Well, I know the movies.
No. Star Wars was the Reagan initiative.
Oh.
To have satellite capability to shoot nuclear missiles. Basically, it was the Patriot missile batteries and the, what do they call it? The Iron Dome in Israel.
Yeah.
That's shooting down all those missiles.
But satellites in space.
Yeah, Reagan was pushing to have the Star Wars a system where there's satellites in space to knock down the Soviet. This is before the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s. The Soviet to blast out the intercontinental ballistic missiles before they reached the United States. It was very upsetting because before that, generally the theory between the Soviet bloc and the free world, or however you want to say it, was mutually assured destruction. Nobody had any defensive capabilities. And once Reagan started talking in earnest about getting funding and actually establishing Star Wars, which they never have, it really upset the Soviet Union, because then we would have first strike capability and we could blow them off the map, and they couldn't do anything about it because we could shoot their stuff out of the skies. So that's what he's talking about, the Star Wars.
But what I thought was funny was his next couple sentences. There's no move to eliminate the Drug Enforcement Agency or the FBI or the intelligence agencies. There's no outcry to stop bailouts of large corporations like Lockheed. And that is just completely different now.
Correct.
Like, it's the conservatives that hate the FBI, that hate, the CIA, everything.
Some conservatives.
Right. But last summer when I was working in Hawley's office, you get a lot of calls from people who want the senator to do everything. And stuff like that. And you sort them into like different topics and groups. And we would get so many calls from so many old people, like just old, like run-of-the-mill, like conservative people, that we had separate like ticket items for defund FBI, defund CIA, get rid of them.
Yeah.
Because we just had so many callers saying, you need to get rid of these people, we hate these people. So it's just an entirely different thing now than what he's even describing at all.
When he's writing this book, the left hated the FBI because there was a published history of the FBI under Hoover investigating inappropriately like civil rights leaders, the left-wing communists, which you can argue whether he should have or not, but certainly infiltrating left-wing social protest groups, which were not violent. Now, some of them were violent. Some were notoriously violent, including the ones that President Clinton pardoned on his way out of office, but the terrorists and all that, domestic terrorists and all that. But so it has really become a switch, because now the left has infiltrated the FBI, and now they're using their agents to literally try to get sources within the traditional Catholic Mass groups, which I'm sure they're still trying to do.
Yeah. Which I don't know if you saw this. This is a tangent. I'm the one introducing a tangent, but The View, one of the hosts.
Allowed.
What?
You're allowed.
What do you mean?
To bring up.
Oh, I'm allowed. I thought you were just calling me loud. I'm like, oh, that's kind of rude. Allowed. Yes, I understand.
Permitted. You're permitted.
One of the View hosts talking about the Harrison Butker speech when he was talking to a group of Catholic students at a Catholic school about Catholic values.
Yes.
Brought up that he was, what did she call it? A member of the traditional Latin Mass.
Yes.
And she goes on and describes it as like a cult-like behavior, and like they worship this Mass and not the actual teachings of the Catholic Church, and they're these radical conservatives. And it's just this person talking on national television, completely has no clue what she is talking about. That's and is just making things up. They just do not comprehend what the Latin Mass is. He's like, this radical idea. It's like, no, that's just how the Mass was for about 1900 years of history on the earth. Well, I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, what she's really trying to attack are the Catholics that are pretty consistently Catholic. And the left wing, especially the pro-abortion people, hate Catholics.
Yes.
They detest us. We are really, really dangerous to them. And anyway, so yeah, I'd like to be a member of the TDL, traditional Catholic, TLM, traditional Latin Mass. Thanks. We should get little badges, and we can have. Was it Whoopi Goldberg or was it the other one, Joy Behar?
It might have been Joy Behar.
We should have her as member number 1.
But going back to the book.
Thank you for that tangent.
Yes. His argument is essentially there are things that, conservatives want bigger government. And I think that's more true now with the use of government to promote conservative values. I think that's a more agreed upon sentiment on the right
and
now.
I think there is a recognition that there are some government benefits that even so-called conservatives don't want to cut. Social Security, Medicare, because they're used to having those benefits, and they become now they want to conserve those things as well. You're really talking about libertarians who are trying to cut that stuff. But there's a lot of, and the funny thing is that like people like Joe Biden were very much supporters of the CIA and FBI and criminalizing. Very famously, crack cocaine, and he talked about those people in creating like a jungle-like atmosphere, in the inner city, and that doesn't seem to bother people now. Though, if he made those same speeches now, man, he'd be run out of the Democratic Party. Yeah. Same dude, still a horrible person.
True.
But anyway, but his argument, funnily enough, is correct that you can't just say conservatives just always believe in less government, period, and that resonates with them. There's something more to it, and he's right about that. So we're going to give him credit for that.
And then his next one, of course, the ultra-rich, what he calls the cynical liberal response.
Yes.
And of course he says that that's kind of true because, he mentions under the Reagan and Bush administrations, there's a massive redistribution of wealth towards the ultra-rich, that now the top 10% of families control 70% of the nation's wealth. Of course, just asserting that as a fact here.
Well, did you notice he says redistribution of wealth, and what Reagan did was he just cut the tax rates, the top tax rates of the really high wealthy from almost unbelievable levels. I think it was over 50% of their income was being taxed. Now I don't know what the tax rates now are for the super wealthy, but it's an interesting perspective that they consider people keeping their own wealth as redistributing it to them, because this is money that has not been sent to the rich. This is the money the rich are able to keep.
Because that's what they always do, because they look at the total percentages, and they can say, well, the percentages of this amount of people now have a greater percentage of the money, but it's not like that money was taken. Like, it's not, the percentage points weren't taken from the poorer people. They were just keeping, and it wasn't being given to the government.
Correct.
Yes.
Right. And of course, now all those people, almost like I said, at least 80-20, are all ultra left, which is really interesting. I think the left is really trying to struggle with how they can be supporting and being supported by the ultra rich, because this is historically their view that Reagan, with his tax cuts redistributing, and of course Trump with his tax cuts was redistributing, giving handout corporate welfare and welfare to. Anyway, so his point was, he calls it the cynical liberal response, is that the ultra rich are attempting to take over the intellectual life of the country to ensure their domination by having these right wing think tanks, and it's almost like the left has adopted what he views the right as to pursue the left wing goals, because they've taken over academia and the think tanks. And the media and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a time capsule of liberal thought in the 1990s, which is so out of date now. It's really entertaining to me in that respect.
I do like how he addresses it. He says there is much to be said for the cynical liberal response. Yes. Much of it is true. Okay, that's great. He says
first is the demonization of conservatives.
He says it has major flaws. Yes. That's what he says is its major flaw. He says there's a lot of problems with it. Yeah. One of those is it demonizes conservatives, but most of it's true.
Yeah, it's
true. Pretty good on the whole.
But there's a slight problem.
I guess it's calling these people horrible, terrible, people.
But he does, at the end of that same paragraph, he does acknowledge there are too many idealistic conservatives of good intentions and moderate means for the demonization theory to be true. And so I have to give him credit for that, even though he says the criticisms are mostly true, that they're demons. But we shouldn't demonize them because there's too many of them that, are...
Darn those good Republicans.
They're idealistic. Yeah. And now they would, like the way they view Trump people is, some people are most of them are racist, but some are just dupes. And that's really what he views.
Some of his other points are decent, though. He says, it attributes too much competence
and centralized control,
which is, just almost an impossible thing to do in the way they describe it. He also says, and I think this is a good point, it doesn't explain why conservative rhetoric can make sense to so many people who did not previously vote conservative. Why would you be convinced into this if it's not just something that you've formerly believed and been indoctrinated into? How can people become conservative? It's just this horrible, evil thing.
Correct.
There has to be some merit to it. And he says it does not explain the details of conservative political positions. How do all of these things fit into this, just funneling money to the ultra rich scheme that I guess some people think conservatives believe.
Yeah, and I appreciated his thoughts about that it implies too much competence, because I think a lot of people on the right now view this overarching left-wing conspiracy as they're controlling the world, they're going to take over the monetary supply, and they're doing this and that. Now, I have to say that there's a lot of people doing a lot of bad things in our country, but I think it does imply too much competence, and I think it can be easily unwound and undone. The left-wing people, this conspiracy to bring in all these illegal aliens. Well, if there's nothing America can't do if we're unified and we have an effective leader and effective means, we could deport every single one of them. I give it 18 months, and it wouldn't be easy, but we have enough resources. If we really wanted to do it, we could. And so when he's this is a conspiracy, we'll never be able to overcome this. I think he's right that the left-wing view of the conservatives that is some sort of all-powerful conspiracy is false. Same thing for people thinking there's a left-wing conspiracy that can't be defeated is false. They just don't know enough. But the one thing I thought was weird, though, he goes on to say that it doesn't explain how these thoughts resonate with people, and he mentions this. Maybe you can elaborate on this because you have a little more education in that field. But he says, the bottom of that 147, our cultural knowledge is physically encoded in the synapses of our brain. And I just don't think that that's true. I think, our language, and you can speak to this more than I can, but, it says new ideas are never entirely new. I think that doesn't give enough credit to individual intelligence and individual free will.
Yeah.
I don't think that if you grow up in a conservative family, you're guaranteed to believe in the strict father theory, and vice versa. So I don't. He just
I don't
asserts
really know
that
what
he makes
he
these
means.
he makes these assertions randomly through this book, and I'm like, okay, where'd that come from? And then he just drops it, and moves on.
Because I'm not really sure what he's talking about. Like, I guess it is technically true that knowledge is stored in our brain somehow.
Yes.
So we have knowledge of our culture. But I think his point is that just like nothing is really ever new. We don't come up with new ideas because we already have this cultural knowledge. It has to be based on the existing culture. We can't free ourselves from this knowledge that's already, locked within our brains, which I guess, is true to an extent. But I think that completely, just doesn't acknowledge, human creativity and free will, like you were saying, which, I just don't think that's true.
It doesn't explain how people that are conservative move left, especially like if they're judges. Or people who are liberal move right, when confronted by things, because you see that every day now. It's like, what do they call that? Is that red pilling? Like the allusion to not John Wick,
The Matrix.
Matrix. Thank you, same actor. All right. Anyway, so it doesn't explain that if it's encoded in our being, but. Whatever. Yeah. So anyway, then he talks about the conservative failure to understand conservatism, which I think there's some truth to this. He says even the views of conservative thinkers don't really help in characterizing what conservatism is. There are three principal conservative descriptions of conservatism. Number one, conservatism is against big government. 2, conservatism is for traditional values. And 3, conservatism is just what the Bible tells us. Well, of course, those are very simplistic views of. And I don't know that he's ever really read any really deep thinking conservatives, to put it simply. Yeah. He likes to quote William Bennett, and you may not know this author. He had the the Family Values book. I forget the name of the. He had several books, and he talked about the cultural influences, and he might have been under Reagan. Or was it Bush that he was Secretary of Education or something? So he was a very popular pop culture type author. I never, maybe it's just me, but I never viewed him as influential on a long term. Yeah. He sold a lot of books. He lectured a lot. I'm trying to remember why I viewed him as fake.
Maybe I don't recognize his name. And
he was prominent, but the left hated him. There's a book of virtues. That's what it was. Because you talk about virtues. But it was kind of pop culture-y type stuff. It was really surface level conservative thought. I don't mean to, it's not like I'm some sort of huge deep thinker, but he loves, this author loves to quote him, but Bill Bennett was a big figure in the culture wars of the 1990s. I think maybe he was cheating on his wife or something. Don't quote me on that. I just said it on a podcast. But there was a reason why I have this kind of intuition now that maybe he wasn't such a virtuous person, but I can't remember why. But maybe he was defamed. Yes. I don't know, I'll have to look it up later and apologize or something.
But essentially, what he says,
but he doesn't really study conservative thought. So he has such a surface level understanding what conservatives view conservatives as because he didn't even understand it. But go ahead.
Because what he says, he quotes him. He says, "Conservatism, as I understand it, seeks to conserve the best elements of the past and understands the important role that traditions, institutions, habits, and authority, et cetera, but he really kind of cherry picks this because he says, well, it doesn't say what is to count as the best elements of the past and why. Well, that's because you haven't looked into conservative thought. Correct. There are authors who have written at length about what are the best elements of the past. And so he's like, well, clearly conservatism doesn't want to preserve all traditional values. Yes. These conservatives are wrong. Yes. Well, it's like, well, that's just because you haven't looked into conservative authors. You just don't know what categories they classify as the best parts.
Yeah, because if you're conservatives, of course you're going to... Witch burning was popular once. Child labor, sale of children as indentured service. They don't really believe that, do they now? Well, they don't want to preserve that. Whatever. So he goes on. But he talks about, well, there's a right-wing version of morality and religion, and then there's the National Council of Churches, which is a liberal group. I don't know if that's even still around anymore. But it was a left-wing group of ministers and denominations.
Yeah, because he's saying, there's a lot of religious denominations that don't, become conservative. So it's not clearly it's not just what the Bible says. Which,
right.
Sure.
But let's see. I was going to mention something. he says on 150, what all this suggests is that conservatives themselves are not particularly good at characterizing what unifies their own political philosophy. Well, he hasn't even really read any conservative thought. Maybe he has, but he hasn't certainly mentioned it here. He's not quoting Edmund Burke, who's, like, I guess they say the father of modern conservatism. I've got like a 3-volume set of conservative authors I haven't plowed through yet. And so but his point is that his point should be, there's not really a unified view of the limits of conservative thought. It's heterodox in some ways. It's more, that they may agree on major issues, but for a myriad of different reasons, motivations. It's not just, less government. Yeah. Because you'll have some conservatives that'll just say, which is more my favorite argument, if the program isn't effective, don't fund it. That's different than saying, don't fund any program, right? But both of us are going to agree, don't fund that program because it doesn't work. And both of them are conservative thoughts, but they come from a different angle, and he tends to simplify the views. But anyway, but he's right. That there's not really a consensus of what a conservative is, even among conservatives.
Yeah.
And then he asked some good questions. But he said if it is liberals who fear the coercive power of the state, why is it conservatives are trying to destroy federal power and liberals are trying to preserve it with regard to certain things? Like as far as abortion and that sort of thing. And so he's recognizing there's some things that are inconsistent with his own theory about all of this, and so he at least acknowledges that. And he says this idea of liberals wanting to protect the most disadvantaged members of society, which is in 151. I appreciate he recognizes this and acknowledges it. He says this tells us nothing about why political liberals favor ecology, why they are not anti-abortion, why they defend funding for the arts and so on. And that's so true. I mean, it kind of doesn't make any sense logically that leftists who are supposed to be like protecting the innocent are in favor of abortion. So there's just something else going on there.
He does kind of finally get to a little bit about thoughts on human nature a little bit further down the page. He says, conservatives think that people are basically rotten and have to be subject to authority and be disciplined, while liberals think that people are basically good and decide what to do for themselves. Of course, overly simplistic, but at least he's finally getting a little bit of that idea in there, that there's something more fundamental to these thoughts than just these, family-based structures, and there's something beyond it. But of course, he just doesn't go into that any farther. He just leaves it at that. And it's like, well, that could tell you a whole lot more about the language used and about the moral systems that we come up with. Yes. If you dug into that a little bit more. Yes. He just does not do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's in the same paragraph. He says it's the liberals who are suspicious of human nature on many issues, and the conservatives who are trusting on a lot of it. And I think that's also true. It refutes his, this uniformity of thought that he's trying to assert in a broad way. And then he says, I love this. At the bottom of that page, he says, moreover, conservatives, too, care. And he puts care in scare quotes about many things. The morals of their children, the right. What is that? Why would you put care in quotes? Moreover, conservatives, too, care about many things. Morals of their children, the rights of whatever.
The unborn.
The unborn. What is taught in our schools. By putting that in quotes, he's really asserting that they don't really care.
I mean, I care about those things. I think those are important things to care about.
I think everybody cares. Well, not everybody cares about the unborn and the people that want to murder them, but everybody should care. I guess I should never use everybody. Many people left and right care about the unborn. Many people left and right care about what's taught in our schools, who are the victims of crimes, and the effect of society on sex, drugs, and violence, and all that stuff. But to put it in scare quotes, I was like, what did you do that for?
Yeah.
You know what? Why? What purpose did that? He needed a copy editor on that one. So one of his buddies who read this before it was published should have said, take the quotes off of that. You're you're giving credit to the conservative thinkers. Why would you put it in quotes?
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you say many conservatives care about those things?
Yeah.
Legitimately. I mean, they care about
Because to his credit, he brings that up because he's opposing, this Michael Lerner says that the ethos of caring is central to liberalism. The liberals must care more. But he says, well, no, the conservatives care about things. But then he puts care in quotes. It's ridiculous.
He's like, he doesn't really want to disagree with Mr. Lerner. Mm-hmm. It's wild. So then the next chapter is the nature of the model. Mm-hmm. And this is where I just don't know why he's...
I feel like he explained all of this.
Yes.
I think he already talked about all of this.
The nation as a family metaphor. So, like George Washington is called the father of the country. And again, he's kind of rehashing, well, we use these certain terms to describe hierarchical structures that are based upon a family model. That's really what he's saying, isn't it? Mm-hmm. He's saying if you view the family as a paternalistic, male-dominated family structure, you're going to use descriptions like George Washington was the father of our country, and George Orwell talks about Big Brother as another example. Well, those are descriptive terms, mm-hmm. and I don't think people really view the government as your older or larger brother. Mm-hmm. I don't think people think that George Washington was our dad. Mm-hmm. But people use those words to describe a type of relationship. Yeah. I think that's where he breaks down. He's trying to say too much, don't you think?
Yeah, but I think it's funny how he brings up the word patriot, because he mentions from the Latin pater, meaning father. And as a linguist and someone who presumably studies ancient languages and stuff, I'd expect most linguists have. He should know a little bit about Roman society, and that was very explicitly like an extension of the father to the state. That's why the patria is the fatherland, the state as a whole, because they had a very much more clearly delineated, like the father has these capabilities, the mother is below the father, and then they extended that very explicitly. You have a lot of Roman authors who extend that very explicitly to the state.
Yes.
So he's kind of missing a lot of the ideas behind that word by just saying, well, patriot comes from father. They're again using father words when they're talking about the country. We are missing a whole lot more background there in the history. And he goes on to talk about, cultural knowledge and stuff and how that's encoded and everything. But he kind of just glosses over a lot of these details when he's pointing out these words here, which I just thought was a strange thing that he's doing as a linguist.
Well, I mean, and he mentions as a cultural reference, which you've probably never heard of, the show Father Knows Best. Have you ever seen that show? Mm-mm. It's an old black and white TV show, and it's a sitcom basically back from the 50s, 60s, early 60s, before they had color. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the father didn't know best. That's kind of the point. Mm-hmm. But sometimes he did. But the concept was, the guy's struggling with the day-to-day issues with his kids and stuff like that, but without all the modern day profanity and pornography and all that stuff. But then he mentions that as if it's somehow reflective of how we view the government or how we view society.
He says his references, I think it's Bob Dole, chiding liberals as thinking that Washington knows best. He's playing off the slogan. It's like, it's a cultural reference that he's making.
Correct. He's talking about a TV show, and he's saying how these individuals in Washington, D.C. don't know. It's more of an argument about localized control over issues as opposed to something about the fatherland or the sex roles or something. He's really talking about local control in a republic. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what Bob Dole, who's not a tremendous conservative either, was talking about. Washington, they think Washington knows best. Mm-hmm. That just means the other. He's just trying to otherize the Democratic Party. Is what he's trying to do.
Yeah. But he kind of continues on, but I think he's kind of just saying the same things that he said earlier.
Yeah.
But he does say, there's here at the bottom of page 155, he's laying out his couple important points.
Yes.
There's several elements of the analysis. The elements are, there are two models of the family, which are culturally elaborated variants of traditional male and female models. These are rooted in long cultural experience, sure. Yeah. Two, the various metaphors for morality, in which morality is conceptualized as strength, nurturance, authority, health, and so on. This exists. These are grounded in everyday experiential well-being, etc. And he says, then we apply those to a nation as family metaphor. It's like, okay, we already talked about those things. Sure. It's important to list those again. But then he says, when he's talking about the evidence, he says the idea, I'm on the bottom of page 156, the idea is to construct a model of how the mind, using natural cognitive apparatus, such as conceptual metaphors and radial categories, makes sense of a significantly wide range of phenomena, especially puzzling phenomena. So he wants to construct a model of how conservatives think about things.
Yes.
Sure, we've covered that already. And I'm trying to remember what exactly he says about how his evidence lines up here. But
yeah, so he does on 157. He says, okay, now we've established what we should try to. How do we verify whether this theory is correct? You have to use this cognitive modeling, but what are we looking for? And he says the phenomena were discussed. Were discussed in chapters 1 and 2, and there are three kinds. First, the model must explain why conservative liberal political stands group together as they do. Second, the model must explain what puzzles liberals about conservatives and conservatives about liberals. Third, it must account for the details of conservative and liberal discourse. It must account for how the texts fit together and make sense. Well, I think that's valuable, and he asserts in this chapter that he will prove that going forward. And he acknowledges getting any cognitive model to do all this is a tall order. Do you think? Being able to have it's like a unified theory of political thought in America, and he says on 158, a president is based solely on modeling on whether the model is plausible and how well it accounts for the three types of data discussed. So that's the three things he's looking for. And then he's saying that
it appears to fit extremely well and to have held up predictably so far. This is a quote, direct quote. Virtually every talk show and political speech I've listened to since working this out has confirmed the predictions of the model.
Yes. Well, I've watched a lot of TV, and the TV agrees with me. That's what he's saying. I've watched a lot of these speeches, and I'm right. But he does acknowledge, towards the end of 159, another possibility is that we have both models and use them differently, applying one model to family life and the other to politics. You think? Because a lot of people, there's a lot of left-wing people that discipline their kids and have pretty traditional gender roles with father and mother, and turn out to be very pretty successful in raising kids effectively that way. But they want the government to be the daddy or mother to everybody else. The government should help all these other people who are too stupid to do what we're doing. And I find that fascinating, and I wish and I think he does kind of clue me into really why they do that, but he does it in such a pompous, insulting way. It's hard for me to get past all his insults and his complete ignorance of conservative thought, especially conservative moral thought. He completely discounts that there's a logical, ethical, and religious basis for the views of conservative thinkers of why they view certain the government should or shouldn't take on certain roles. It just completely discounts that as if that's just a facade for their true motivations.
It's especially frustrating because his whole, framework, the whole thing he's trying to put together is based on these moral models.
Yes.
It'd be one thing if he's just saying, I'm looking at the speech, patterns of conservatives, comparing them to liberals.
Yes.
And he could just give us the data and then, put together his weird left-wing, conclusions of these people are evil, these people are good.
Right.
But he's trying to put it in a deeper understanding of a moral framework of how we think about the whole world, about how we think about morality. And it's very frustrating that he can't do that fairly, even though he said at the very beginning of the book, I'm going to do this very objectively and put everything, at a distance. But then at the end, I'm going to get into my real opinions. I don't know what his real opinions are going to be at this point, because it's been just very not subtly bashing on conservatives the whole time.
You think he might give us a lot of credit in the latter chapters? You think he'll
I think he's going to reveal that he's a conservative.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, do you?
Absolutely. That'd be a twist.
That would be fascinating. I don't. The title of it is Moral Politics: How Liberals and Conservatives Think. He doesn't have any concept of how conservatives think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clear from at this point in the book that he's just guessing. I don't even know what conservatives think as a group. It's such, and it was a wild group back in the 90s too, because you had Phil Graham types who ran for president. It was pretty popular. And or like Steve Forbes, who had Forbes magazine and this and that. But like Steve Forbes was flat tax.
Mm-hmm.
His solution to everything was flat tax, oversimplifying. But he was very much a kind of an economist type of thing. If we just had a flat percentage everybody paid, it'd simplify the tax code and release the juggernaut of American enterprise. And then you had Barry Goldwater types, which are a little bit earlier than that. But you had Bob Dole, which was just kind of a mainstream conservative. Let's just manage the decline. I'm insulting him, sorry, but you had Reagan conservatives that strong national defense, kind of an active law enforcement, CIA type roles, and some social services, but cutting taxes. And one of the theories was you'd starve the beast. They wouldn't have the money to pay these. Well, they're just borrowing money now, the dummies. There's no balanced budget. So you had a really weird mix, even back then, of a lot of different conservative thought about the role of government. There were really strong libertarian arguments back then. Like Rand Paul's dad ran for president and had a following among Republicans, but they were kind of outside the ring. So, like I think it would be hard for me to describe present day conservatives. I mean, what would you could you have a unified theory of DeSantis political conservatism, Rand Paul political conservatism, was a Cotton, his conservatism is very strong national defense, very interventionist, and Trump. I mean, I don't even know if I can summarize Trump's views. Trump has a lot of really inconsistent views. Is there a philosophical unified theory of Trumpism? I don't know. I mean, there's been attempts, like Victor Davis Hanson does a good job in a book called The Case for Trump, of trying to summarize what Trumpism would be without Trump. But I don't even know what that is. And I'm among them. I read that stuff all the time. And he doesn't even seem to have attempted it.
Yeah.
So, because
I think it is like a worthwhile project to be doing, to try and come up with some sort of cohesive thing, looking at language, looking how people think, how they express things.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's what linguists should be doing. That's a very interesting topic to look at, but he just can't bring himself to actually consider how conservatives think.
Yeah.
He just cannot get past, his weird perspective he has on things.
I don't think he can make a good faith. He can't come to a good faith understanding of it. And it's similar to, I know I would have a hard time writing a book explaining the left-wing theory of the role of government. I think I could do a decent job.
I think it's easier for conservatives too, because they're surrounded by with the media, with academia is by and large a lot of left-wing thought, so you hear it all the time.
Yeah, and I think we're more fascinated by it. I really do. I think because like I will watch occasionally videos of AOC, where she's talking deep thoughts or whatever. And because I want to know, why does she think those things? Is there any consistency for this? And I'll even listen to Cori Bush, who's a crazy left-wing corrupt politician out of St. Louis, but she has some really interesting thoughts. They're all wacky, but I'll listen to that stuff and I'll consider it. Like, meaning it doesn't make any sense. Is there some kernel of truth here? But I just don't ever get the feel. I just don't get the feel from him that he's trying to really understand where conservatives are coming from in order to explain them to a liberal audience. Yeah. And it is, again, like the gorillas in the mist. Oh, let's try to understand these weird creatures, these stupid, evil creatures. Why do people follow them? These weird, evil creatures. So it's very strange. It
is strange, but I think we'll be getting into, what's the next chapter here? Moral categories in politics. So he's going to be looking, I think, a little bit more about how these things are explicitly, mentioned in politics, which is good.
Yes.
9 chapters in.
Stick more to the language. I think it'd be beneficial.
Yes.
He's established his theories writ large, so maybe we'll get and I'm trying to give him benefit of the doubt, because he does acknowledge that liberals don't understand where conservatives are coming from. So he's at least saying that. He acknowledges it, but he doesn't seem to acknowledge it in his own mind. I don't know.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, do you have any other final thoughts for this episode?
No.
Well, this has been Season 8, Episode 7, I think, of Unlimited Opinions. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter, ULMTD Opinions. I have been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
It's a good cicada episode. I think you probably hear them in the recording.
Beautiful little creatures.
They're awful.